Well, good morning. It is Thursday, February 18th, and we are gathered for our morning devotion. And today we're going to begin a new book. It's called Lent for Everybody, the Gospel of Mark. It's by Tom Wright. Some of you know him as N.T. Wright, a theologian from the Church of England. And what this does is this will go through the Gospel of Mark in these 40 days of Lent. This will be our devotion. We'll go through this and we'll read what he has to say. Some of it can be a little lengthy, but that's okay. We're here to learn. We're here to talk about Lent. And what this is, it's in conjunction with the sermons that we'll go throughout Lent, our sermon series. And so I hope that you not only listen to the Sunday sermons, you have an opportunity to do the devotions as well and really get to the crux of what we're talking about in Lent. So each one will have a scripture passage and a focus passage and then a short and simple prayer at the end. So today's scripture passage is Mark 1, verses 21 to 45, and the focus of this is verses 21 through 28, which I will read. They went to Capernaum. At once on the Sabbath, Jesus went into the synagogue and taught. They were astonished at his teaching. He wasn't like the legal teachers. He said nothing on his own authority. All at once in their synagogue there was a man with an unclean spirit. "What business have you got with us, Jesus of Nazareth?" he yelled. "Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are. You're God's Holy One." "Be quiet," ordered Jesus, and come out of him. The unclean spirit convulsed the man, gave a great shout, and came out of him, and everybody was astonished. "What's this?" they started to say to the others. "New teachings with real authority? He even tells the unclean spirit what to do and they do it." Word about Jesus spread at once all over the surrounding district of Galilee. And so Professor Wright says, it was the organist's night off. His deputy, fresh from college and looking even younger than he actually was, took charge of the choir. The singers, good-hearted lot, but choirs will be choirs, were almost instinctively pushing the boundaries to see what would happen. Trivial things, a note fluffed here, a lead missed there, and the most trivial of all, but a telltale sign of implicit rebellion. Some were wearing brown shoes, not the regulation black. I watched as they proceeded back after the service. The young man didn't bat an eyelid. Very quietly, but with deadly accuracy, he alerted them to the mistakes. "And gentlemen," he added, "black shoes, please." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He was in charge, and they knew it. Point made, and it was good to see. The surprise of authority. Someone's in charge here. We'd better sit up and take notice, is what Mark is highlighting in the early incident in Jesus' public career. And it shows what so much of the gospel is all about. Jesus was going about telling people that God was at last the becoming king. And he was behaving as if he himself were in charge, as if he were the king. There's the puzzle. As much a puzzle for Jesus' first hearers as for Mark's as well as it is for us. Mark contrasts Jesus' authority with that of legal teachers. We may not immediately pick up the significance of that. In the modern Western world, legal teachers would presumably be teachers in a law school, where young practitioners would be trained for their various tasks. But in ancient Israel, a legal teacher was much more than that. Israel's law, after all, went back to Moses, or rather to God himself on Mount Sinai. The law for them wasn't just a system of rules and regulations. It was, so they believed, the ultimate revelation of what it meant to be human, what it meant to be God's people. And when the Jewish people were hemmed in and oppressed by pagan enemies, as they were in Jesus' day, the law was the badge they wore, proudly, to show that they belonged to God, even if things were tough, just as now. To teach the law in that world was much more than training the next generation of barristers. It meant setting the social and cultural boundaries. It meant maintaining God's people in this district and special identity. But the people who taught the law did so not on their own authority, but by interpreting and applying existing laws, both written and oral. This is what so-and-so taught, they would say, quoting both recent and ancient authorities. But Jesus didn't do that. As we see in other Gospels, the Sermon on the Mount, for instance, he was quite outspoken. You've heard it say, but I say to you. He behaved and spoke as if he were in charge. And he backed up his speaking with action. Here we run into a problem for us. In Jesus' world, as in many parts of the world today, people's lives were blighted by forces or powers beyond their control, forces that seem to take them over. People say in our world, I don't know what to make of it. People in Jesus' world would reckon that they did not know why some people seemed totally off the rails. They were hostile, spiritual forces out there, hard to define, but powerful in their effects. Calling such a force a demon or unclean spirit didn't mean they knew exactly what it was. It was a way of saying that the person was overpowered by an outside force, a malign power from beyond themselves. And part of the point of God becoming king at last, which was the center of the message of Jesus, was that all rival powers were being defeated. Jesus came with power and authority greater than the forces that had corrupted and defaced human lives. For God had become king meant that all other forces had to be dethroned. And the most obvious sign of that was that the dark, shadowy forces that had seized control of some benighted individuals were being deceivably challenged. These forces were cunning. They seemed to know how much. Here and elsewhere we see people they controlled shouting out what Jesus wanted at that stage and kept secret. He was God's Holy One and had come ultimately to destroy all forces of evil in the world. They seemed to have the inside track on spiritual realities. For Mark, and I suggest for us, stories like this should flag up the fact that there are many things in this world that appear to go horribly wrong, which the best brains we have can't even analyze, let alone solve. The experiences of terrifying and inhumane regimes around the world over the last century teaches us that the forces can be unleashed, which make people do unimaginably terrible things to one another. And all this has happened at a time when, in the modern Western world at least, people have banished religion and even Jesus to the sidelines, into the corner labeled personal therapy and lifestyles. Fortunately, Jesus refuses to stay in that corner, just as he refused to fit into the expectations of the townfolks of Capernaum. He insisted on being in charge, even though it will be at a cost of his own life. This is the pattern of the whole gospel, ending up at the cross itself, where, strangely, Jesus defeats all the powers in darkness. And so, Sovereign God, help us to trust you when things seem to be out of control. And so just to summarize this, so Jesus goes into the synagogue and doesn't teach as everybody else taught. And we know that as we read our Gospels. But it was his authority that the people recognized. He teaches with such grace and eloquence, they couldn't help but recognize that he was preaching with authority. And so what the simple solution to that is he was God. He was telling them what God's kingdom was like, what it should be like. It shouldn't be about following rules and regulations as being our spiritual disciplines. It should be about the disciplines of love and hope and peace that God is offering. And so he was offering this to them in a new way, in a new teaching. And friends, for us 2,000 years later, that still holds true. We are in a world where we don't follow rules and regulations in a spiritual way like they did in the Jewish community did. But we are called to task. We are called to live the gospel of hope and love to all people. It's a new teaching. It's a teaching that gets us shunned by many as the religious, and Jesus is put aside to, what does he say, personal therapy and lifestyles. It's put aside into those categories. But it's our authority in our lives. It's what gives us hope, and it's what gives us peace.